Hello?
Hey, Rich, it's Larson. You got a minute?
Sure, Larson, what's up?
Well, hello and welcome to the Got a Minute podcast. I'm Larson Hicks, and I'm joined today by my co-host, Pastor Rich Lusk. What's up, Rich?
Good to be with you, Larson.
Yeah, likewise. I'm looking forward to this episode, have been for a while, because we've got my friend, really more my hero than friend. We've only talked a handful of times, but if you know me, if you've known me for very long, over the last 5 years or so, you've probably heard me mention Dr. Keith Smith and the Free Market Medical Association and the Oklahoma Surgery Center. I'm a huge fan of what you're doing, Dr. Smith. So we're really excited to have you on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, so you made a comment to me. Well, maybe before we get into it, I just want to kind of set the stage. So you're an anesthesiologist. You and I are both in the medical profession, and so we sort of know quite a bit about the ins and outs of insurance industry and Medicare, Medicaid, and just all the different ugly things that go on underneath the surface and behind the scenes in the healthcare industry. But you've been practicing for a long time. You saw this stuff early on, and you did an unusual thing. I haven't seen very many physicians do this. You decided that rather than just complaining about it, that you'd maybe do something about it. So could you tell us a little bit about just that journey and kind of the development of your practice out in Oklahoma?
Yeah, you bet. Yeah, I'm a practicing anesthesiologist. I have a full-time practice, and started that practice in 1990 here at Oklahoma City. And I was recruited at Oklahoma City primarily to do cardiac anesthesia. Cardiac anesthesiologists were in short supply at the time, and I was born and raised in Oklahoma. Didn't train in Oklahoma, but came home. And it wasn't very long after I'd been in practice that I realized I was an accessory to a financial crime committed against the patients entrusted to my care. And there really did not appear to be anything that I could do about it. Wasn't any way to escape. And I was raised in a Christian home where the golden rule meant something, right and wrong meant something. You didn't treat people any way other than like you would want to be treated yourself.
Yeah.
But I was submitting bills that were a complete surprise to patients. And then I later found out that the hospitals were just completely bankrupting and just financially devastating patients to whom I was providing anesthesia care. And so I was an accessory. I was an accomplice, and I didn't see a way out. It's not what I signed up for in medical school. To make matters worse, the hospitals, starting in about 1993, became very heavy-handed with physicians down in the weeds in matters pertaining to the actual care that we could deliver, the supplies, tools, and equipment that was available to us to provide the care that we thought patients needed. So the institutions where I worked were not only bankrupting patients, but they were interfering with the care that these patients were receiving. It was clear. It was about just maximizing revenue, making as much money as they could. And I knew the only way as an anesthesiologist I could escape was to have ownership and control of my own facility. So a like-minded anesthesiologist and I were fed up, and we knew we could complain about this the rest of our careers, or we could actually do something.
Right.
And so we walked away from anesthesia practices anyone in the United States would consider very lucrative, very rewarding. We just walked away. We founded the Surgery Center of Oklahoma in 1997 on May 28th. And we did it with a mission that was really pretty simple. We would provide the highest quality of care that was possible to patients. We would never let a surgeon work there that we would not let operate on us. We would never accept a dime of money from the government. And we also would let patients know before they arrived how much they were going to pay us. So there would never be any financial surprises.
Yep.
And that was our founding mission. And that's how we started. Nobody gave us a chance. And it's been a wild success. We've been open. How many years is that? I mean, we've been open 27,
97.
28 years
Yeah, it's a
now.
lot. Yeah.
Yeah. And we were successful very early on. Dr. Steve Lantier, my partner in crime in this outfit, he and I are both pediatric fellowship trained in anesthesia, and that was really what we love to do. So we anesthetize a lot of children, children who were belonged to parents who owned self-funded companies, and
Yep.
people that really could affect and direct business our way. We took care of all the Division I athletes in the state, with the exception of University of Tulsa. And so we were known early on for very, very high quality,
Yeah.
really uncompromising quality, and very reasonable pricing. So that's really how we got started.
It's beautiful. Well, it's such a cool story, Dr. Smith, and I think a lot about healthcare in the work that I do in emergency medicine, and there's just a constant. I'm sure it's been this way for a long time, but there's just a constant um, chatter of grumbling, of physicians just upset about the system and fed up with the system and wanting to fix the system. But the thing that we keep saying, I keep trying to say is it's not going to get better until you all start building your own practices. You start taking it back. I mean, if physicians were to take control back of healthcare, all of this stuff that we're complaining about would fade quickly into the background. But that doesn't seem to be something that anybody's willing to do. I tend to appreciate the hundreds of thousands of dollars of student loan that a lot of physicians go into, and then the fact that if you do something like you're doing, you immediately have a target on your back, from corporations, the big hospital systems, the payers, especially the government payers. If you're in emergency medicine, I think people think, well, how do you provide emergency medicine if you're not getting paid by Medicare and Medicaid? I mean, that's half your patients. So I just think it feels to doctors like there's so much of an uphill battle to try to do anything about it. But the truth in my mind is that pick an industry, show me another industry that doesn't have similar problems. I mean, this is true of education. This is true of, engineering. This is true. I mean, I think everything in America has got all kinds of barnacles, corporate and governmental barnacles that have attached themselves to them. So how do you convince somebody to just jump in, take the leap?
Well, it's not for everyone.
Yeah.
That's for sure. Somebody has got to reach a point where the risk benefit kind of makes sense. For me, that began in 1992, when the elder George Bush inflicted the resource-based relative value scale on the industry. And it affected everyone, but primarily hospital-based physicians, radiology, anesthesia, pathology, and ER, as you know.
Mm-hmm.
And the payment that we had traditionally received from Medicare was cut in half. So in 1990, when I started, I was paid about $1,100 for the anesthesia services for an open heart surgery for a Medicare beneficiary. After RBRVS, that was $550.
Wow.
Not satisfied that they had cut us enough, RBRVS 2 happened in 1993. If you remember, Bill Clinton was elected and everybody was scared to death of the Clinton healthcare plan. And so everyone just laid down when this happened. But in 1993, round two happened. The last payment that I received from Medicare for an open heart surgery that was 6 hours long and very difficult was $285. The last payment that I received from Medicare for a knee replacement, for which I provided the anesthetic, was $78.
Hmm.
And physicians just, anesthesiologists felt trapped. They didn't know what to do. They just continued to provide the service. And I decided that I'd read enough economics by that point to know that this was not personal. Prices are just signals in the marketplace. And I was being sent a signal that my service was valued at those amounts. And I thought it only rational of me to respond with a signal of my own. And so I quit. And I didn't quit seeing Medicare patients. I just quit filing claims. I didn't feel like it was right to legitimize an illegitimate system. I'd also come to the conclusion that government didn't have any money that it didn't first steal from someone else. And so for me to accept government money made me the recipient of stolen property. So I walked away from all government money in early 1993, never taken a dime since. And that's why.
Yeah.
That's a hard decision.
Yeah.
That's not for everyone. And that I was just at a place where it was so disgusting to me to go through the process and then to look at the payment that I received and realize this came from someone else at gunpoint.
Yeah.
This was not some voluntary exchange.
Yeah.
And so I walked away and never looked back. Now, I would agree with you. Physicians have laid down, but I would also say and remind everyone we are the sellers of a service. We're in the sales business. Whenever the buyer demands something, they get it. If the buyer does not receive what they demand, then the sellers who don't provide it go out of business. So, half of the patients in this country don't care what it costs because government is paying, someone else is paying. There are only about half the people in the United States, even if that. If you take Medicare, Medicaid, TRICARE, VA,
Yep.
Indian Health, if you add all that up, those people, they don't care what it costs.
Right.
It doesn't even matter what the bill is. It's
Right.
the rest of us that are not in those groups that do care, that have sticker shock.
Yep.
It's those buyers that have to put their foot down and say, I want to know how much it is before I buy it. And I want to be able to shop for those services that are shoppable.
Yeah.
And 90% of all medical services can be commoditized. Even emergency room services they can be tiered. As you know, you could have tier 1 through 4, tier 1 through 10.
Yeah.
I mean, just pick a number and put a price on it. And so when the buyers, and those are the self-funded companies, the cost-sharing ministries, when they put their foot down, then the sellers of the service, the physicians and the facilities, will have to pay attention to that demand.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they will patronize someone else, and all those who do not respect the sovereignty of the buyer will go the way of the dodo, as they should. So I fault physicians for not thinking in more clear economic terms, but I really fault a lot of the buyers for not insisting that we sell to them, embracing the same market discipline every other industry in this country must endure.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are great points, Dr. Smith, and I love what you're saying, and it resonates very much with me. None of us would accept this kind of system when it comes to car repair. None of us would take a car in and say, just fix it and then tell me what it costs later.
Right.
Before somebody works on your car, they write up an estimate and they tell you
Right.
this is what it's going to cost to fix it. And then you can make a rational decision based on your resources and your needs and so forth. You can make a rational decision about whether to proceed. And because prices are withheld from us, in the healthcare industry, you can't make those kinds of decisions.
Right.
That's right.
So yeah, it creates all kinds of inefficiency, all kinds of waste, and really all kinds of bad decision making, because you're not even allowed to, you're not given the information you need to make a rational decision.
Well,
So
and
I like. Go ahead.
yeah, the naysayer will say, "Oh yeah, but you're unconscious and you're in an ambulance and they're taking you to the emergency room and you can't shop then." Well, actually, that's true. However, reputation typically follows those who abuse the vulnerable.
Mm.
So, if someone in that situation is financially devastated by a hospital, for instance, that takes advantage of
Yeah.
them, then that reputational damage should be reflected in the marketplace going
Exactly.
forward.
Right.
So it's not real time for that particular patient, but it is market corrective going forward when hospital X gets the reputation as a price gouger, bankrupter.
Yeah.
So you trace this back to bills that were passed in the early 1990s. Obviously, the problem in a lot of ways goes back further than that. It seems
Oh
like we
yeah.
have removed healthcare from market forces that would, with competition that would create a better product at a better price, and with regulation, then and the bureaucracy that comes with that through the government, which creates additional layers of inefficiency and excess cost. And then, of course, the way insurance companies are regulated and choose to pay or not pay as well, you have ended up in a situation that seemed that you described it as the real loser is the customer, the patient, so to speak. It seems to me that all of us really are losers,
Yeah.
in this kind of system. You were not being compensated well. You were not being compensated appropriately as a physician, with this system. So obviously starting a clinic like yours could be one way to go. I'm interested to know whether or not other clinics like yours have been started throughout the country, and are there other things that can be done? Is there anybody out there who's making the case for bringing market forces to bear upon the insurance industry, upon the healthcare industry, anything like that? Or are we so far gone that that simply seems impossible at this point?
Well, to fast forward our story in order to answer your question, we withstood all of the attacks that came at us for what we were doing, because it turned out we were quoting prices over the phone that were 1/10 of what the local so-called not-for-profit hospitals were charging for the same service. I would argue performed better by a better surgeon.
Yeah.
So this was very embarrassing for these hospitals, and they attacked us. The insurance companies attacked us, and all their attacks backfired. We became known even more so as a champion of the poor. And there were a lot of stories that got around about patients for whom we provided service at our cost or below,
Hmm.
or for no charge whatsoever. Um, we grew, we built a brand new facility, and then the insurance commissioner um, stumbled on an idea that almost put us out of business, where they stacked in and out of network deductibles on top of each other. And up to that point, we've been filing out of network claims. None of the insurance companies would let us in the network. We didn't understand that until later. So we our waiting room emptied, because patients could not financially justify paying all of their in-network deductible and the part of their out-of-network deductible they needed to pay to come see
Mm.
us. And it was very confusing to me because I'm a free market guy. I
Yeah.
mean, I'm radically free market. And, if you're cheaper and better, you ought to have a hard time keeping up with the demand.
Right.
And we were about to close. So in 2009, I launched a website and I put all of our all inclusive prices online for everyone to see. And I did this with three goals. One was to make ourselves more known to patients that had sticker shock,
Hmm.
individuals with no insurance, high deductibles, self funded plans, cost sharing ministries. I also wanted to start a price war so patients that were in other parts of the United States could use my price to leverage a better deal in their hometown if they couldn't or did not want to travel to Oklahoma. the third thing I wanted to do was better understand the scams that were at work.
Hmm.
Why is the market being interfered with, and how?
Hmm.
And I would argue all three goals have been accomplished. But what happened was patients, well, the first thing that happened was Canadians started to come to our center, which I thought was
Yeah,
fascinating
they have
because,
free healthcare, I thought.
they all have coverage, whatever that means. They just didn't have access to the care they needed. But
Your
then,
euthanasia will be covered.
that's right. That's exactly right. So patients started traveling from all over the United States to Oklahoma City to have their surgery because they knew the price and they knew they could afford it.
Yeah.
And what that meant was, while they were coming to see us, they were walking out of another doctor's office and leaving town. They were voting with their feet.
Yeah.
So I started to get these angry calls from surgeons and anesthesiologists and surgery centers, like, "What is wrong with you? I mean, you are stealing our patients." That was the mentality, and it was like the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross grief progression, where at first there was disbelief, and then there was anger, and then
Right.
there was sadness, and then there was acceptance. And I got calls in all of these stages. But when they got to acceptance, and I told them, "Listen, I'll show you what I'm doing. I'll show you how to do
Yeah.
this. I will teach you how to put bundled, all-inclusive surgical pricing together, and you can do it too." Well, in the meantime, I met Jay Kempton, who runs the Kempton Group, which is an independent third party administrator, and he has self funded clients who are always looking for value. And he asked me if he could purchase on their behalf as a proxy buyer what I was selling and for their benefit. I said, sure. So he began stealing his his competitors' clients,
Hmm.
and they wanted to know how in the world do you work with a surgery center like this? And he said, "I will teach you." And so he and I both, after we got to know each other, realized we were both very missional.
Yeah.
This is not a take over the world, get rich strategy.
Yeah.
This is about changing things one patient, one surgery at a time. And Jay was very open and transparent with his competitors, and so was I. So what happened was others started to copy us. Some were completely out of the closet and launched a website, like Wellbridge Surgery Center in Indianapolis, like you guys in Moscow. I mean, there are a handful of real mavericks that are out there that don't deal with insurance at all and have posted online prices for everyone to see. And then there's everything in between. There's still some people that have their toe in the water and they don't have a website, but if you call them, they'll quote prices over the phone.
Yeah.
But then there are also hospitals who have been robbed of patients and business before by this free market movement. And they have people at the phone ready to quote a price if it looks like they're going to lose a case.
Hmm.
So it's hard. I mean, we've been copied outright by lots of people, and I continue to teach people how to actually assemble all inclusive surgical bundles. But the number of actors in this marketplace is hard. It's hard to say
Yeah.
because many of them want to remain cloaked so they can continue to extract revenue from the mainstream side.
Yeah.
Uh, but this is swept all over the country. This Free Market Medical Association formed. It was Jay Kempton's idea. There are now 37 state chapters. We've had Ron Paul and Steve Forbes keynote these large annual meetings. The next one is April 10th through 12th here in Oklahoma City. I'd encourage you to come. It'll be fun because it's our 10th year. So
Yeah.
Jay's calling it a nostalgic victory lap because we never really thought we'd make it 10 years.
Yeah.
But here we are.
Awesome.
So it's a very vibrant, good news
Yeah.
movement. This
Yeah.
is good news. I mean, there's not a lot of good news out there, but my God, cheaper and better
Yeah.
in the healthcare industry. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Our biggest problem in marketing this and getting the word out is people think it's too good to be true, frankly.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
Well,
Well,
think
I've seen some of what you're talking about. My family has not had health insurance, actually since Obamacare went through. We had a very decent Blue Cross Blue Shield policy, which of course President Obama promised we'd be able to keep, and then we couldn't
Yep.
because they quadrupled the price on us. But so we switched over to MediShare, which is a Christian medical sharing ministry. But for a number of things through the years, I've called the doctor's office and just said, "Look, I don't have insurance. Can you give me your cash price?" And you find that there's a real willingness on the part of a lot of doctors and doctors' offices to negotiate. So that was good to see. Do you think there's any way to salvage the health insurance industry, or would you want to see insurance just go away altogether and people just deal with cash?
Well, if the insurance companies would get back in the insurance business, that would be great. But they're not. They are money changers. They are in the providing and selling false discounts and prepayment for healthcare.
Mm,
So they're really not in the insurance business. I really don't think the current system can be salvaged, and I don't pretend to be one who wants to change it or take control and make it better.
yeah.
I think that's futile,
Yeah.
and it's futile because the state is involved. So it's inherently political. One of my favorite quotes that I read recently is a guy named John Barry who said, "Whenever you take science and you add politics, you get politics." And I think that's the same with medicine.
I
Yeah.
think
Um,
we saw that during
it,
COVID.
Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't believe it's salvageable. I believe our role as individuals is to do what we can do
Hmm.
to create an alternative.
Hmm.
So patients have a choice. And then if they patronize that choice, then the old system dies of thirst.
Yeah. It's good. Dr. Smith,
So what would you
go
tell?
ahead. Go ahead,
Oh,
Rich.
go ahead, Lars. I don't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to kind of pivot. So, Rich, your question may be more in that same thread. So why don't you go ahead and then I'll pivot after your
It's a little
question.
bit different, but I'll go and ask it, and then
Yeah.
don't forget what yours is,
Yeah.
Lars.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is really interesting. So, what would you? And full disclosure here, I've got a son who's in medical school in his third year. So, what would you tell young doctors as they're starting out how they could pursue the kind of thing that you've done?
Well, it depends on the field that they select.
Yeah.
If they decide they want to do primary care of any kind, then they should pursue the direct primary care model, which is a subscription practice. You pay $80 a month or whatever it is, and you have unlimited access to the physician. If they're going to go into specialty care, I would encourage them to find someone in private practice who is not a hospital employee and basically throw yourself upon their altar as an apprentice sacrifice and have them sustain you through, the rough, early, dark times until you can fly on your own.
Hmm.
The one thing I tell medical students they should never do is go to work for a hospital because once you're a hospital employee, you work for the hospital.
Hmm.
You can't work for your patients.
Hmm.
You're hopelessly compromised. And in case that sounds too harsh, every single day a physician sees a patient that needs their gallbladder removed, for instance, and they can't refer to the surgeon across town who they know is the best gallbladder surgeon in the region.
Hmm.
They have to refer to the butcher that works for the same hospital system that they do, or
Hmm.
their job is imperiled.
Yeah.
This is the kind of moral injury that leads to burnout.
Yep.
It is disastrous for physician um, well-being.
Yep.
So, and it's a position no doctor should ever be in. Do I do what's right for the patient or do I save my job? What kind of choice is that?
Yeah.
So I discourage medical students from ever going to work for a hospital. And for those who think, well, I'll go to work for a hospital, it's, the first and pay off my student loans, well, then it's difficult to escape.
Yeah.
And the hospitals know that. So there are all sorts of barbs on the hook that really prevent people from wriggling off the hook after they become an employee to make it extremely difficult.
Hmm.
And it can be done, but it's very, very, very uncommon.
That's good. That's good advice. The work I do is primarily locum tenens, which is doctors who are sort of in that position of being burned out by working for the hospital, working for a big system or a big corporation, and they're ready to kind of take matters in their own hands and sort of start working on their own terms. I think it's a step in the right direction. It gives them more freedom and gives them the ability to potentially go start their own thing. Kind of as a segue. I have a DPC friend who used locums as his kind of his stopgap, as he jumped from hospital employed to having his own DPC. The question I was going to ask Dr. Smith is I think this whole conversation, and I think it's fascinating, and I really sincerely would talk all day with you if I could about just the healthcare industry. But I think there's a bigger topic I want to at least get you to weigh in on a little bit here. And it's just, I feel like I'm having conversations all the time, about work, and men in the kind of, early parts of their career thinking about ambition and about work. I also happen to live in Huntsville, Alabama, which is this huge government, defense contracting, industry. That's kind of the main. We're kind of a company town, so to speak. When I'd asked you once about, I think the way I put it was, are you one of these guys that thinks you have a moral imperative to generate profit or something like that? And your response was something like, no, my paradigm is more around maximizing value for my customers. That I thought it was a very profound comment, and it's something I've kind of meditated on a bit, and we've corresponded a little bit about. But could you elaborate on that and just kind of in general as a professional in the marketplace, how do we ethically move forward in the marketplace in a way that we can feel proud of and feel is worthwhile?
Well, there are two economic models in the industry right now. One, which is unfortunately the prevalent one, and the one that the big hospital systems champion, is how do I maximize revenue?
Yeah.
How do I get every drop of blood out of this turnip I can possibly extract?
Yeah.
The model I champion is how do I deliver maximal value? And that is a more ethical approach, depending on how you define value.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a student of the Austrian School of Economics, and they're the ones, starting with Karl Menger in Austria, that proved that value is truly subjective.
Mm-hmm.
And so, the old saying, it's worth what someone will pay for it,
Mm-hmm.
is kind of a crude way
Yeah.
to express the subjective theory of value.
Yeah.
The opposite of the subjective theory is the objective theory of value.
Right.
And that's the way of Karl Marx. That's a different way of, or even mainstream economics. So if you think about exchanges between individuals, unless they're voluntary, and unless both parties walk away better than they were prior to the exchange,
Right.
then there's something coercive about it.
Yeah.
So if I have $2 and you have a gallon of milk, and I want your gallon of milk more than I want my $2, and you want my $2 more than you want your gallon of milk, we both walk away from that exchange enriched,
Yeah.
better off.
Yeah.
And that is the basis for capital formation.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the only moral and ethical way for individuals or parties to interact. If I put a gun to your head and say, give me that 2 gallons of milk, you're going to give it to me, but there's a winner and a loser.
Mm-hmm.
That's zero sum. That's government's way of doing business. You do it our way or else. There are consequences. Failure to comply.
Mm-hmm.
So I think a valued exchange is one away from which both parties walk, where they're satisfied and glad that they actually entered into that exchange, and it is the basis of repeat customers. So
Yep.
I'm proud to say, the patients that come to Surgery Center of Oklahoma know that their gallbladder removal is going to be $6,836 before they get there, all in.
Yep.
And they pay that. And then when their child needs their tonsils out, we see them again. So I think providing
Yep.
value is a moral and ethical imperative, um, regardless regardless of how much money actually exchanges between the two parties.
I love
Dr.
that
Smith,
statement.
one objection that's
Go
often
ahead.
brought up with any kind of free market solution to most any problem we face is, what about the poor? What about those of lower incomes? Um, I'm sure you've run across this. What's your how would you speak to that issue?
Well, two ways. Number one, I'll point out that if a patient has hurt their knee and they call their local hospital and they find out it's going to be $30,000 to fix their knee, and then they find Surgery Center of Oklahoma or uh, any other entity that's part of the Free Market Medical Association, and they find out it's going to be $3,000. The one question that patient never asks me is, what about the poor? So this is a very individual response that we must have to patients. And I think we have to be careful when we ask questions, what about the poor, that we consider them in the aggregate. Because if we consider the poor in the aggregate, then we are very inclined to consider a solution in the aggregate. And that means that we let government prey on them and essentially deny them care for budgetary reasons. The real answer, though, to the individual poor is if we can generate savings of 90%, and I believe we can, if medical services in the United States, let's just say they're 50% too high, how much money then is available to take care of the few who remain? For instance, if if you if you grab a group of people and say, "Can you afford $30,000 to get your knee fixed?" There's a high percentage of them that will not be able to pay that. But if you ask that same group, how many can pay 3,000? Now, what about the poor is a much smaller number of people, and then it's easier to deal with. I think we have to deal with individual poor patients
Mm-hmm.
on an individual basis,
Yeah.
and to flirt with some kind of systemic aggregate uh, solution
Yeah.
to the poor results in what's happening in Canada,
Yeah.
where you just euthanize them because the resources are not available for their care.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, there's a reason why Jesus said to love your neighbor and not to love humanity in general. He is commanding us to love the particular segment of humanity that is situated across the street from you, and not all humanity writ large, because like you said, that leads to very perverted and twisted solutions that end up damaging everyone else.
My partner Steve Lantier, he was asked one time in an interview, "What about the poor?" And Steve said, "What about the rich? They can't afford it." So yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
there's a lot of really, I hate this phrase, but low hanging fruit.
Yeah.
But if we can make services 90% more affordable,
Yeah.
then what about the poor is a manageable conversation.
Well,
That's a good.
this may be a non sequitur, but Ephesians chapter 4 verse 28 says, "Let the thief no longer steal, but rather let him labor, doing honest work with his own hands, so that he may have something to share with anyone in need." I love the verse because, and just in reference to what you said earlier, if you're not, you have a moral imperative to deliver value. If you are not, you are to paraphrase, you are a thief. To paraphrase what you said, if you're extracting money from somebody without delivering value, you have somehow tricked them out of their money, and that's theft, right? And so I think what you're arguing for is, hey, doctors, let's stop being thieves. Let's stop being complicit to theft in one form or another, and let us no longer steal, but start to do honest work. And guess what? The outcome of that is going to be that you are going to have something to share with anyone in need. You're actually going to have the means, not just financially, but ownership, and control over your practice and the decisions that your practice makes, to be able to say, hey, we're gonna write this one off, or we're gonna throw this patient a bone, right?
Yeah, and I have no problem with a gradualist
Sure.
response where physicians put their toe in the water and kind of inch their way toward that goal, because this problem didn't happen overnight. And in a way, it's reckless for a physician to just turn on a dime and do a 180. Then they can't pay their bills and they're really scratching their head. So it's good to have a plan, and
Yeah.
to gradually make this change, and that makes sense for a lot.
Yeah. It's really good. So just kind of coming back to the comment you made a minute ago, just about anyone who's not providing value, is or just the moral imperative to provide value, just across the board. I mean, I think about so much of the way that we try to qualitatively measure the value of someone's career or someone's job. It tends to be in these weird, certainly in the Christian circles, it tends to be these, we say, well, does this job provide a lot of quote unquote work-life balance where I get to spend a lot of time with my family? Or is this job, too demanding where I'm working long hours, or I have to think about work a lot? And I don't think there's a lot of consideration from most people today of evaluating the value or the quality of a job along the lines of, is this a job that's delivering significant value, to other people? I don't think that enters many people's calculations when they're considering one job or one opportunity over another. Can you talk about that a little bit? Do you see that, or think that's a problem just more broadly, that just in the marketplace that people aren't thinking that way?
Yeah, absolutely. The advice I gave my children was never take a dime of money from the government. Work for yourself if you can, and do something meaningful. Where the exchange, it's easy to tell that there's a quid pro quo,
Mm-hmm.
where both parties win. But yeah, I don't think there's much of that in the United States. I think even in the medical profession, if it makes money, it's okay.
Yeah.
And nobody gives any thought to whether, the buyer was hoodwinked or victimized.
Yeah.
I think that we tend to be a more ethical profession than people give us credit
Yeah.
for. But yeah, more broadly, I think there are a lot of people that are making a living providing services for which there really is no market. And of course, the government, with all of its intervention,
Yeah.
really confuses things, because so many industries are subsidized, for which there really is no actual market.
Mm. Which is the economic term for that is rent seeking, right, Dr. Smith?
Yep.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. Rent seeking is not, is a word that I wish more, at least Christians, I wish had a better understanding of what rent seeking is, and we're exhorted, by pastors to avoid such a thing. But I don't know that I've ever heard that from a pulpit. Um, I had another question just about. I guess it's. I'm kind of on this theme of work and careers and evaluating. What's ethical and what's not. But I think the paradigm of value creation and I think just the idea that profit is ultimately the evidence. It's the tangible evidence that you added value to the service that you took a whatever it was, a raw material, and you passed it along to a customer, and as it passed through your hands, you added value in such a way that the customer was happy to compensate you for that value because they're better off, as you said earlier. um, I just think I think very few of us have a robust sort of appreciation for the supremely moral and beautiful, frankly, nature of economic exchange.
Yeah, and that's what Rothbard. Um, that's how he characterized the market. Murray Rothbard said it's powerful but beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
It is. It's a beautiful thing, and the role of the entrepreneur is to anticipate the buyer's perception of value
Yeah.
in the future.
Yeah.
And so the entrepreneur delays their gratification uh, beyond the point where the buyer decides to patronize their idea, and so they are paid much later. So this concept of time preference is
Yeah.
very important to understand. And it's a part of understanding even human nature. But yeah, that's the role of the entrepreneur in society, is to anticipate the future buying preferences and what customers are going to value, and get out ahead of that, and then they either win or they lose. If they're not very good at that, then they go out of business, and their ideas don't get very far anymore.
That's right. Well, and and those losses, the way I think about those losses, you know, I'm about to take a couple $100,000 hit in my business over a bad deal, a deal that went sideways. And what I've told my employees was, well, this must be a very valuable lesson because we're paying about a couple $100,000 to learn it. Um, and so of course we have to have our affairs in order so that we're able to sustain those kinds of losses. But that's there's information that you're buying information even in those losses, that gives you a competitive advantage on your next venture.
That's right.
Well, Pastor Lusk, any thoughts, questions for Dr. Smith?
Dr. Smith, as much as I appreciate what you're doing, I hope I don't have to come see you anytime soon.
Yeah.
But I do greatly appreciate
Yeah.
what you're doing and the perspective that you have brought to bear upon healthcare. I think it's very much needed. I think there are many areas of life where we see that government interference in the market
Yeah.
has made everyone worse off.
Mm-hmm.
And there are always all kinds of unintended consequences that come with government interference in the marketplace, and I certainly think that's been true in the field of healthcare. And so I'd love to see more doctors go the route that you're going.
Mm-hmm.
How could doctors pursue? You talked about a group of doctors who are interested in free market solutions to healthcare. You mentioned the name of a group. How could doctors pursue that if they were interested?
So the Free Market Medical Association is a great place to start. The website is fmma.org. The national meeting is next month, April 10th through 12th. It's always uplifting and inspirational. If you go to YouTube and go to the Free Market Medical Association page, speeches and keynotes delivered there in the past are there for people's viewing, to kind of whet their appetite. So that's where I would start.
Do you think that, I mean, particularly looking back on how everything was handled with COVID, do you think that that will make more people open to this kind of solution going forward?
I think it will. If people don't distrust the government now after COVID, I'm not sure they ever will.
Yeah,
I mean,
good point.
the government lies about disease and
Yeah.
war and budgets. I mean, what do they not lie to us about? So hopefully the next time someone in government speaks, everyone will, at least as a default, entertain the idea they're being lied to.
Mm-hmm.
um, this this free market movement is radical, and it's a 180
Mm-hmm.
for what the Medicare for All crowd is
Yeah.
recommending. And so it's not for everyone, and that's okay. um, if if a group wants to get together and form a commune and see what that looks like, I have no problem with that. I just don't want to be forced to be a member of that group.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
Well, I can tell you yesterday morning, I went to the dentist, and my day got worse after that because I came home to fill out my tax forms.
Oh no.
Oh,
This is
that's
all hitting
awful.
home for you.
Yeah.
Well, I
That's the
have.
only thing I can imagine that's worse than sitting in the dentist chair.
Oh, you're on suicide watch. That's
I know,
terrible.
it's a terrible day.
That's right. Well, I hope to be at the conference in April, Dr. Smith. I've got another conference in California that's right around that same time. So I'm going to try to kind of double up and get to both of those. It might be the same time as Presbytery, Rich. It's April. What is it? April
Uh-oh.
15, somewhere around there.
10 through 12.
10 through 12. So
Okay.
yeah, I hope to be there. And Dr. Smith mentioned the group that I'm associated with up in Idaho. There's a surgery center that's started up there called Veritas. So I know that those guys will be up there. The good friend up there also has got a very successful DPC, and I'm sure they'll be there too. So yeah, I'm really excited about it. I'm hoping to bring more of this free market stuff, to our community. We're sort of in a I think I don't know what you'd call it, a free market medical desert, here in our part of Alabama. I mean, it's Blue Cross Blue Shield has a monopoly pretty much on insurance out here, and there's nobody, that's interested in doing anything to compromise their relationship with the payers.
Any thoughts on why that is, Larson? Is it just because of the monopoly that Blue Cross Blue Shield has, that the doctors don't want to risk being cut out of that?
Absolutely. And I mean, I think that it's kind of a Stockholm syndrome kind of thing. I think, physicians, it goes both ways. I see Stockholm syndrome from physicians. I see Stockholm syndrome from patients. I think the patient examples, I've got a good friend who's on Kaiser Permanente, supposedly great insurance out in California. Kid needs an ear tube. And the day before his appointment, he gets a call from the practice saying, "Hey, by the way, you're going to need to bring a check for $6,000. That's your portion of the bill." And he said, "Well, I thought we had great insurance." I said, "Yeah, well, that is good insurance. You're getting a deal." And I pulled up Dr. Smith's website and said, "Hey, that procedure is $1,500 at Oklahoma City." I said, "Buy first class tickets for your wife and your kid, and tickets to Six Flags Over Texas, and you guys stay at the Ritz-Carlton. Go get that ear tube, and you're still going to come out ahead." And his response was, "Well, I'm already paying for it, so I guess I might as well just go through with it." And it's like, and then I think the same thing happens on the physician side. I think I talk with physicians all day, every day, and they'll gripe up and down, and they understand all the corruption and all of the problems. But when it comes down to it, when you start going, well, let's start something, it's like, well, it's the devil I know, and kind of thing,
Well,
Um,
it is interesting, Larson, because we do, we have a state that I think is as politically conservative, maybe even more so than Oklahoma, similar in that sense. But it is interesting that we don't have anything along these lines as far as, a free market for healthcare. So, yeah, that's something we need to do something about.
here.
And you probably do,
Yeah,
but they're in the closet.
yeah,
If
Well,
you
that you're
call,
probably right about that. I'm sure
yeah,
we have a lot of doctors who would be very sympathetic with this, and certainly a lot of patients
yeah, and
who would be.
ambulatory surgery centers that will quote you prices over the phone, but they're not about to advertise them.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'm sure we
Yeah.
do have that. I know we have
Yeah.
that because I've experienced that and used that. But yeah, you're right. It's not out there.
did I
So,
tell you
but I would
about?
love to see it come out and be more public, more
Yeah,
publicized.
did I tell you about Uber Docs? Have you heard of that, Dr. Smith?
I
That
have.
website. Yeah, I've had her on my other podcast for Sycamore. She's doing a similar. She's trying to create kind of a website, kind of a directory of doctors who will keep who will take cash patients basically, which I know you guys do something similar too. I believe.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, it's it's kind of one of those things where, like you said, I think buyers have to get fed up with it and have to, the lights have to come on at some point. I think employers have to get, I'm paying an insane amount of money out the door every month to Blue Cross Blue Shield, and I can't stand it. And at some point here, I'm just gonna bite the bullet, and we're gonna make a switch, to something like a health sharing thing, or I don't know, we're not big enough probably, Dr. Smith, to do our own self-funded thing. I think that you've got to have how big do you have to be typically as a company to really be able to pull that off?
It's more dependent on cash
Yeah,
flow than size of employees.
yeah,
But the cost shares are dealing with companies that are not like yours, that are not big enough to self-fund.
yeah,
So I would reach out to one of the cost sharing co-ops and talk to them about your plight,
yeah.
and they probably help you.
And what do you tell consumers? Because I think you're right that I tend to focus on the physicians needing to take back healthcare, but I think you're right that consumers are really holding they're the ones driving prices. And what do consumers need to be doing?
Well, just imagine Huntsville, Alabama. Um, the director of HR at NASA
Yeah,
goes to a local ambulatory surgery center that's independent
yeah,
and says, listen, we've got Blue Cross Federal for all these people, and we are getting killed.
yeah,
Blue Cross has these 50% discounts, and every single year, what we spend for medical services goes up
yeah,
every single year. Can we just work directly? Can we buy the services you provide
yeah,
directly? What do you think that ambulatory surgery center is going to do? Well, the first thing they're going to do is they're going to worry that that sort of interaction jeopardizes their relationship with Blue Cross that they
100%.
have as a surgery center.
Yeah,
But if it's enough business that they can afford to flush Blue Cross down the commode, they're going to go for it.
yeah,
And all the parties are better off, the buyer and the seller, because you cut out the intermediary.
yeah,
But if a buyer like that puts their foot down, like there are automakers
yeah, yeah.
in or around
Oh yeah,
Huntsville, if they went to uh, two or three independent imaging facilities or surgery centers and said, listen, this is crazy. Let's just work together directly.
yeah,
And the buyer and the seller have that conversation. What you end up with, presto,
yeah,
is a mutually beneficial exchange.
yeah,
And if you don't have, the Blue United, Cigna, Aetna, and the broker in the room with their fog machine running full steam, then everybody gets to the same
yeah,
page. But I fault the big buyers for not doing that.
yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
Well, the other party that I think about is, we were talking about charity earlier. Every hospital in America still to this day is called St. Francis or St. Luke's or something. It was somehow associated with the church in one form or another. And I feel like the church has seeded, historically the church has thought that healing was part of the ministry of Christ, and that true religion was caring for the poor and widows. And so the church has always played a part in subsidizing, healthcare for the needy. And we've completely stepped out of that. I think we have such an anemic view of the role of the church and the kingdom, that we've just kind of ceded any and all charitable work to the government. And so all of
Which
those,
is really not
or to
charity.
corporations, and so now all of those, St. Mary's and Deaconess hospitals are now owned by some megacorp, private equity company that's probably owned by BlackRock.
Right. Yeah, but after you pay your tax bill, how much of the horsepower of charity is left in your bank account?
That's right.
Yeah. So
100%.
yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, but people keep electing folks who are confiscatory in their ideology,
Yeah.
and so yeah, I mean it's tough to be charitable when you're broke.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I agree with
Dr.
you.
Smith, are the physicians in your clinic competitively compensated?
Yeah, for any given surgery that you see on our website, the physician is paid much more than the insurance carriers would pay them, and we do that to attract the best talent. Um, but we do that because we don't try to hit a grand slam on the institutional side. The Surgery Center of Oklahoma essentially runs as a not-for-profit, as a tool of our practice. But then the people who are actually performing and providing the services are paid handsomely.
So
Yeah. So
just
it's
to
really a win-win for everybody. That by cutting out the insurance bureaucracy, cutting out the government bureaucracy, patients pay less, doctors make more.
yeah. And just
Those who
Much
really
more.
matter.
just
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
educational purposes for our listeners who aren't familiar with the way healthcare works, in any given, procedure, you've got two major buckets of money. You've got the professional fees paid to the physicians or the physician practice, and you've got the facility fees are paid to the hospital or the ambulatory surgical center. And as there's become more and more consolidation of hospitals and more lobbying, on the behalf of those huge hospital systems, the percentage of the bill that goes to the hospital versus the doctor has increased steadily and significantly to the point that the biggest part of the bill is the facility fee, and so the only way to really come out ahead is to be the hospital. And so what Dr. Smith is saying is that they're basically taking the facility fee, portion out of the equation and rolling all that into the compensation for all the providers.
Yeah, and I would encourage the listeners to not fall prey to the poor mouthing narrative of these so-called not-for-profit
Yeah.
hospitals. They work very hard on this narrative, and every one of these hospitals that's going broke has got a crane or two out front building on, even to their loss leader, the emergency room.
Yeah.
So you have to be really careful that you don't succumb to this poor mouthing strategy that's implemented nationwide.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm so I'm inspired by the work you're doing, Dr. Smith, and I really sincerely hope that others, I've got a brother who's just in his first year working kind of more in the defense space, and he's taken this this position that rather than doing what everyone in this town does, which is tries to maximize the ROI on a particular contract by dragging the project on and delivering as little as possible so that they can continue to drag it along. He's taken the approach of, I'm going to deliver the most value I possibly can, execute ahead of schedule, produce what we promised, exceed what we promised. And lo and behold, more and more contracts and business are flowing to him and his group. So I think you can, like you said, you can take an incremental approach and jump into some of these places and start to really drive things towards a more free market and value-based model. I guess the last thing I'd say, maybe we can close on this topic, because this is something I've made this comment to a lot of people casually, and I think it's kind of mind-blowing to a lot of people to think about. But what I've said, and this is nothing new to you, Dr. Smith, but this idea that the healthcare quote unquote system in America has really morphed into a sick care system. And by that, I mean, it's an industry that has set itself up to maximize the return on investment to healthcare institutions, providers, whatever, when somebody is sick. So we're looking to maximize the profit opportunity on sickness versus, I think, what most physicians thought they were getting into when they went to medical school, which was to prevent illness and to return people to health. And we see this through, cancer screening and statins for life and all of these things, that I think are all symptomatic of this sick care system. But just maybe you could comment on that as we close it out.
Yeah. So, the government, and once again, has done us no favors with their food pyramid. So that has resulted in the deaths of probably millions of people by now, advocating multiple meals a day, high carbohydrate intake. But again, this FDA food pyramid was hoisted on us with the money of big food manufacturers who generate a lot of processed carbohydrates behind it.
Yeah.
So it becomes kind of a sick care industry, also because big hospitals and institutions make more money when things go wrong.
Yeah.
So if someone has a complication after surgery and they're admitted to the ICU, hospital makes a lot more money.
Yeah.
So all the incentives they're just completely wrong, and the government is always at fault when in doubt.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, it's hard not to be cynical. It's hard for me not to feel like our healthcare system exists to extract whatever wealth someone might have from them before they die. But it sure seems like that's what we've got today. And I don't think it's going to get any better unless physicians follow your example and just start to try to take it back.
Yeah, I think it's going to get worse.
Yeah.
Our job is to create an alternative and let this current system, whatever you want to call it, just die first.
Yeah.
I don't think it's fixable. I think it's going to get a whole lot worse. And eventually buyers will demand an alternative. And thank God that one is there and is vibrant enough to help them out.
Yeah, that's great. All right, sir. Well, you've been very generous with your time. Thank you for taking the time to come on the God a Minute podcast. And hopefully I'll see you in Oklahoma next month.
Look forward to it. Thank you, guys.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Smith.
All right. We'll see you.
See ya.
The God a Minute podcast is a ministry of Trinity Reformed Church in Huntsville, Alabama. If you like this podcast, you might enjoy one of our other podcasts, The Good Life Podcast, featuring Matt Carpenter interviewing experts in their field about how their work contributes to the good life.